Because nothing says stable mental health like using a podcast to trace your emotional development through movies. Welcome to another round of me oversharing through pop culture. Yeah, I just did an episode on the albums that shaped my life. And no, I'm not out of ideas. I'm just kind of a firm believer that movies, like music, are a whole lot cheaper than therapy. Now, this isn't going to be a film student's thesis or some deep dive into the Criterion collection. These are about the movies that stuck with me because they were profound or because they had a killer explosion and I was 12. Some of these movies made me laugh, some made me cry, some made me realize I'm kind of a weirdo. All of them really helped build what has become my personality. So, if you're ready to psychoanalyze a stranger through his taste in movies, you're in the right spot. Let's talk about the movies that made me, for better or worse. Mostly for worse on this one. Growing up, I watched a lot of things I probably shouldn't have. Blood-soaked action movies like Rambo, wildly inappropriate comedies like The Hangover, and horror that definitely left a mark like House of a Thousand Corpses. My childhood movie nights were basically a curriculum in chaos, violence, and morally questionable humor. So out of all that, what's the movie that stuck with me the most? The one that's burrowed deepest into my soul after all these years? It's the Muppet movie. I'll give you a second. It's not a bit, it's not ironic. The Muppets hold a weird special place in my heart. Don't worry, the soul crushing stuff, it's coming. But this wasn't just a random flick I stumbled on. It was one of the first movies my brother and I owned on VHS. A scratchy tape that sat on a shelf for years. Watching it was basically my intro to movies in general. I mean, the Muppet movie still has this kind of old school movie making magic that still amazes me today. The way it blends humor, music, poetry. I meant puppetry. Puppetry and story. It's like a masterclass in joy, even if it was through a fuzzy VHS quality. What's even crazier to me now, though, is how much that movie actually taught me. Not in a preachy way, but through these subtle lessons about how sometimes it's okay to be an outsider, that you do get to choose your own path and your own family. And hey, if your family's a ragtag bunch of Muppets on a cross country adventure, then so be it. That's love, man. Now, watching as an adult, it's a whole different experience. You catch all these little jokes and cameos that I totally missed as a kid. I didn't know who Mel Brooks was. The sly adult humor sneaks in through the cracks. You get the self-aware poke fun at yourself moments, the nods to Hollywood insiders, and it's like the movie grows up with you. It adds new layers and new meanings every time you revisit it. Whenever life's chaos kicks in or things kind of feel dark, that's the movie that's always a steady beacon. It's in my corner all the time. A reminder that even in a messed up world, there's room for laughter, hope, and weird little families. So yeah, maybe it's an oddball pick for someone like me who likes their horror movies and their metal, but that's the beauty of it. It's a real comforting movie. It's been a constant thread through the weirdness and winding path of my life just by embracing the weirdness. So let's say the Muppet movie was where my obsession with movies began. Spider-Man 3 was where it sort of evolved for the worse into something more emotional and more chaotic. It I was around 7 or 8 when the movie came out, and it was in a pretty formative moment for my life. It was right when my dad and I were really starting to bond over comic books. I was having issues reading and keeping up in school, so my dad bought me a bunch of comic books and said, "Hey, this is how you're gonna learn to read." I was 7 or 8, so read better. uh, but he grew up on the classics, and I was just sort of discovering this magic of larger than life heroes punching their problems in the face. And so when Spider-Man 3 was coming to the theaters, it wasn't just a movie to me, it was an event. We went to see it opening day, packed theater, giant screen, the whole kit and caboodle. And I was electric. I was ecstatic for this movie. The black suit, the triple villains, the big emotional stakes, it felt like my Spider-Man movie. I was too young for the first one, I was too young for the second one. This one I could see I was here for it. I didn't care that people thought it was overstuffed or messy. I thought it was cool. Peter Parker went emo and started throwing punches at a jazz club. Peak cinema. Now, my dad was a little bit more grounded. I remember looking over at him during the movie, expecting that kind of wide-eyed comic nerd grin that I see out of him a lot. I saw it a lot out of him a lot as a kid. I see it a lot more now that like comic book movies are a more popular thing. But he didn't have that. He had this quiet, arms crossed look of disapproval. Not angry, just confused. Kind of like maybe watching a cover band butcher your favorite band's greatest hits. To me, though, it was everything. It didn't have to be perfect. It was fun, it was dramatic, and it made superheroes feel kind of emotional and vulnerable. And for me, that was enough. It taught me early on that movies don't have to be flawless to make an impact. Sometimes connection is more important than precision. The emotional context rather than the actual quality. Don't worry though, I did make it up to him. Uh, a few years later, I bought his tickets to see The Dark Knight, and that movie got the seal of approval. It was kind of the equivalent of me saying, "Hey, sorry about the dancing emo phase," and all was forgiven. But looking back, it sort of represents this weirdly perfect middle ground between childhood awe and the growing pains of getting older. It wasn't just a superhero movie to me, it was a turning point. A bridge between discovering stories and learning how to wrestle with the messier ones. The ones that don't quite stick the landing, but they still land somewhere in your heart. Keeping on our theme of superhero movies, I was around 14 when my dad introduced me to The Crow. He didn't just throw it on in the background, he handed it to me like it meant something. At the time, I was knee deep in comic books, and it wasn't just the big name superhero stuff, but like the darker, grittier stories. Like, I had your Batman and your Spider Man, but I also was getting into Judge Dredd or Officer Down, things like that. uh, but I was starting to flirt with heavier music at the time as well. My playlists were kind of this weird mix of classic rock, early metal, and whatever moody deep cuts I could find buried in YouTube comments at 2 a.m. And he kind of knew I was on the edge of something creatively and emotionally. I was starting to pull away from clean, safe stories and lean into things that were a little bit edgier. They had a little bit more bite. And The Crow, that was a full on push off the edge, fly, you know. And excuse the bird pun, but it kind of wrote itself. But visually, it was my first real exposure to how stylized a film could be without losing emotional weight. The rain drenched, burned out city feels like a character all of its own. And it's dark, yeah, but it's not in a way that's bleak. It's beautiful in its decay. And that mattered to me. It helped me realize that darkness doesn't have to be nihilistic. It can be poetic. It can be hopeful, even in a kind of twisted way. The tragedy didn't erase the love at the heart of the story, it proved it was real. That if love can overtake these outside obstacles, that it's true love and it's meant to be. And the music, I mean, my God, man, that's one of the best soundtracks of all time. You've got Nine Inch Nails covering Joy Division, The Cure, probably the most haunted sounding, Pantera, Rage Against the Machine, Helmet. It was like the film had cracked open a vault labeled, "Here's what every angry, grieving kid needs to hear." And it was the tone of the movie, it was the character's pulse. I burned that soundtrack into every playlist I made for the next 2 years on like my iPod Nano. Remember when those were a thing? But it sent me on a path of discovery, industrial, alt metal, gothic rock, even a little bit of post punk. And I think that The Crow was one of the first times I saw that aesthetic could be a language. How a story how it looked, how it sounded, how it felt. They aren't just decoration, they're part of the story itself. The understanding kind of shaped how I write, how I analyze film, even how I make playlists. It taught me that creative expression wasn't about one thing. It was the synergy of image, sound, theme, and emotion. It gave me permission to be moody, to seek out beauty in broken things. And the fact that this moment came from my dad, a man who's never pretended life was simple, made it even more meaningful. He didn't try to clean up the world for me. He showed me a story that embraced the mess. The Crow wasn't just another comic book movie, it was a bridge. between my love of art and storytelling and a deeper emotional current I had not quite tapped into yet. So earlier I mentioned the Muppet movie and said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, the soul crushing movies are coming." Yeah, I hoped you enjoyed the frogs and the rainbows because now we're taking a hard left turn into existential misery and cinematic trauma. During the writing of this episode, I decided to kind of go back and watch some movies I explored during a bit of a darker time in my life. Some on a dare, some because I just really felt like pushing myself to some honestly really dark extremes. So we're gonna do a rapid fire about my why am I watching this shit phase, also known as my early 20s. So first up is Sallow or the 120 Days of Sodom. The movie is basically a dare disguised as political commentary. Think of it like a college philosophy class, but everyone's naked and screaming. And it's one of those movies I don't recommend. You just kind of warn people about it. Then came a Serbian film, which feels less like a movie and more like a war crime. I watched that one on a dare. Every time someone says it can't be that bad, they end up in the fetal position. It's bleak, it's brutal, and it has all the emotional warmth of a meat locker. I didn't finish this one. If you know the movie, you know exactly where I stopped, because there are some lines even I draw. And of course, there's August Underground. This isn't even a film in the traditional sense, it's more like the cinematic version of Tetanus. It was shot on a camcorder with all the grace of a home invasion. This one makes found footage feel like a personal violation. No plot, no characters, just relentless psychological erosion. It's like if nihilism had a mixtape, and I watched all three of these because something is intensely wrong with me. But hey, there's one bright spot in all the suffering. Rob Zombie's Halloween. And you know what? I'm going to die on this hill. I like it. It's aggressive, it's messy, but Zombie took Michael Myers and he gave him a messed up backstory and the energy of a cage fight. It's not subtle, it's got personality. It wanted to be entertaining. Still probably one of my favorite movies in the entire franchise. But all these movies did have one thing in common. They pushed me, not necessarily in good ways, but they dragged me into deeper waters. This was the period where I kind of stopped watching movies for comfort and started using them to stare into the abyss. Because sometimes seeing how bad things can get on screen is a weirdly cathartic way to process the real world chaos around you. But amid all that bleakness, one movie did stand out. Not for being the most shocking, but for being emotionally the heaviest. Requiem for a Dream. I would not say it's just a movie. It's kind of an emotional endurance test. It's 102 minutes of beautifully crafted emotional demolition. You watch it and then you kind of lay down for a while afterwards. But it's not shock for shock's sake cinema. You know, it's not like a Serbian film. It's not about grotesque imagery or boundary pushing content. It's about how ordinary people make tiny, awful decisions that spiral into absolute ruin. And it does this so effectively that you finish this movie feeling like you need rehab. The score is kind of the real villain here. The string section has done more emotional damage than most horror movies combined. I mean, every frame is manicured, it's frantic, it's intimate, and just clinical enough to make the collapse feel inevitable. You don't really root for the characters, you watch them like a slow motion car crash you can't look away from. It did teach me something vital about the power of film. Not all stories need a happy ending. Not all art is made to comfort. Sometimes it's more to confront you with things you'd rather ignore. Addiction, obsession, delusion, denial, all in a fever dream montage that ends with four people in four corners of hell. You don't really recommend Requiem to someone casually. You warn them. And if they still press play, that is between them and God. And finally, because you know I have to talk about it, The Batman. A movie that takes one of the most iconic characters in pop culture and manages to peel back layers that most people don't realize are there. Pattinson's Batman isn't the polished, confident hero we see in Nolan's trilogy, or the flashy, sometimes campy versions from before. This is a younger, more raw, I would dare say fragile Batman, still figuring out which part of him is the mask. Where Bale's Batman was the embodiment of controlled rage, Pattinson's version feels more like a man still haunted by his trauma, stumbling through the fog, driven by pain that hasn't fully shaped yet. It's a Batman still trapped in the grip of vengeance. When you contrast that with a take like Ben Affleck's, who's a grizzled, world weary enforcer, nearly cynical but committed to his brutal brand of justice, Pattinson's Batman, by comparison, is much closer to the beginning of the journey. A brutal, impulsive force who hasn't yet figured out that vengeance alone can't save anyone. And it really drives that idea into your head. Vengeance is seductive because it gives pain a direction. But vengeance also blinds you. It turns you into the very thing you fight against. When Batman's words are echoed by the criminals he's hunting, it's sort of a wake up call. Suddenly his mission's twisted, it's co opted. What makes this iteration so compelling is watching him confront that mirror. He begins to understand that real justice is not about punishing, it's about breaking the cycle. It's about hope, responsibility, and dare I say, forgiveness. This Batman's transformation from vengeance to justice feels not only like a classic superhero arc, but it's also a profoundly human one. We all wrestle with anger and pain, sometimes letting them define us. But the Batman challenges us to recognize that anger it's not sustainable. Growth comes from shifting towards something bigger than ourselves. Pattinson's portrayal is uncomfortable in the best way. You feel the weight of that inner battle. And it reminds us that heroism isn't about being perfect or invincible. It's about choosing again and again to do what's right, even when it's the hardest path. So while Batman may be a figure of myth and legend, this film brings him back down to earth as a man who's just trying to find his way from vengeance into justice. And in that struggle, there's a lot of room to relate. And there it is. My entire emotional coming of age story, told entirely through a bunch of movies I watched while slowly becoming a human raccoon in a band t shirt. And sure, it may not have been quite as deep or profound as the music episode. I mean, I didn't quite bare my soul to the Muppet movie the way I did with Nine Inch Nails, but growth looks different for everyone. Sometimes it's crying to Requiem for a Dream, sometimes it's watching Kermit ride a bicycle and going, wow, cinema. The truth is, movies have always been there for me. Whether I was a wide-eyed kid rewinding VHS tapes or a brooding 20-something-year-old deep in his everything is pain phase. They helped shape how I see the world, how I process it, and occasionally how I impersonate Spider-Man in the front of a mirror. So thank you for sticking with me through this weird little love letter to film. If you've got your own list of strange, sad, or straight up chaotic movies that left a mark, I'd love to hear about them. Until next time, keep it weird, keep it honest, and get the most out of life. Watch a fucked up movie.